the Music Theory Lady. Hi guys, welcome back to the Music Theory Lady. Today we're talking about the basics of notation. So we're going to be talking about ledger lines and grand staff. When it comes to ledger lines, we're talking about short little lines that we add above and below the staff to be able to figure out what the notes are. So you can add a note really far up from treble clef or any clef and really far down below the staff. But you won't be able to count those lines and spaces unless you add those short little ledger lines. So you're still going to count these ledger lines just like you would line, space, and you're still going to go up and going alphabetical, and when you go down, you're still going to be going reverse alphabetical. So here's some examples you can see of some ledger lines way far above the staff and way far below the staff. Notice that you really only need ledger lines up to the note that you need to find. You don't have to add any lines past that note because that's just superfluous. You don't need any of that extra stuff, just up to the note that you need. Then we're going to talk about middle C. Middle C is the C that's the closest to the middle of the piano. Here it is, you can see in treble clef, it's actually one ledger line below treble clef, and then you can see it in bass clef, it's one ledger line above bass clef. So you've always got to know where middle C is. It's sort of like our anchor for all other notes. So if you can know what it looks like in treble clef and what it looks like in bass clef, you're up to a good start. Then we're going to talk about grand staff. Usually when you're reading lines of staff, you're going to read one line from left to right and then another line from left to right. But if you want to read both lines of staff together, for instance, piano plays in two lines of staff with two clefs, or if you're looking at quite a few instruments being performed together, you need to be able to combine those lines of staff to be performed at the same time. So usually a grand staff is what we use to do that. You can see here I have two lines of staff already, but we need four more things to add to make it a grand staff. The first thing is a vertical line that we call a bar line. The second thing is a brace or bracket that also combines those two to be read and performed at the same time. And then you need two clefs. We typically use treble clef and bass clef. So again, we're going to come back to that question of where is middle C? Where is middle C in grand staff? Well, if you remember in treble clef, it was one ledger line below treble clef, one ledger line above bass clef. So when we look at in grand staff form, it's actually directly between treble and bass clef, sort of like in the middle. Therefore, it's middle C. Here's some octave identification numbers. All of our notes on the staff get their own number, same as on the piano. There's 88 keys on the piano, so every single one of those pitches gets an identification number. If we didn't have identification numbers, you might have to tell another musician, I need you to play the B that's 3 octaves below middle C, so on and so forth, and it can get rather confusing. So we apply numbers to each of the octaves of the piano to help us identify those keys faster. Every octave begins with C. So if you see here on the chart, you've got keys that are below C. That's the A and the A sharp / B flat and the B. These three keys are actually 0 in number. But then once you start at the first C, it is C1. And then every key after that C1 going up is also going to be a 1 until you get to the next C. So you can see here it is C2 going all the way up to B2, then C3 going all the way up to B3. And then look at this, middle C. Middle C is C4. So we've got C4, then C5, C6, C7, and C8. So there are 8 Cs on the piano in total, and you have to know all of those octaves and where to find them. I always like to just treat everything again off of middle C. So I remember that middle C is C4, and that way I can find all my other notes based off of that. So again, if C in the middle is C4, the B just below that, because it's in a different octave, would be B3. If you notice up here in the top right corner, it says 8VA. That means an octave above. So these pitches, even though they look just like these pitches, are actually sounding higher by 8 notes than these lower pitches here. And that's just a way of being able to show it to the musician without having to draw 50 bajillion ledger lines. It's a lot harder to read music that has lots of ledger lines than it is to read music on the staff. So actually, normally these notes here that you see would already be shown with an octave up symbol, and these would be shown with a 2 octaves up symbol, which is 15 MA, or another word for that is quindicesima. The 8VB and the 15 MB are indications for octaves below the staff. So if you ever see 8VB or 15 MB, then those would be indications of octaves below the staff. Then we get into where middle C is again in all clefs. So we've talked about it in the grand staff, we've talked about it in treble clef, we've talked about it in bass clef. And what you need to know is C clef actually is showing you not just where C is, but where middle C is, or C4. If you look here in the alto clef and the tenor clef, we've already talked about those. That's showing you where middle C is, or C4. These other clefs you might see from time to time, and all you need to know is still that middle part of that clef is showing you C4. And as long as you can figure out your notes based off of that, you should be pretty good. Now we need to look at a little bit on how things overlap between the staffs, and this can be, or staves, sorry, and this can be a little confusing, so I wanted to show it to you on paper. If I draw my grand staff, so I'm going to do a treble clef, a bass clef, a long vertical line, and a brace. What I need you to know is that all of this space in here, there's a lot of overlap that happens. We've talked about that this is middle C in treble clef, and this is middle C in bass clef, but you also need to know the other notes and how they can be misunderstood. So you've got C4 and C4. The question is, if I draw this pitch on the staff, this note is F4. And that's what it is in treble clef. But if I were to draw that note in relation to bass clef, I would need ledger lines. So I'm going to start with C, that's the line. The space above that would be D. The line above that would be E, and the space above that would be F4. So this F4 in treble clef and this F4 in bass clef are the exact same pitch. I can do the same the other way. If I wanted to show a pitch, let's do all the way down here. This is E3 in the bass clef. If I were to show that pitch in treble clef, I would need to count down quite a few ledger lines to find it, because remember this note right here on this line is E4 because it's above C4. So I need to go down to the E below C4. So if this is E, this space is D, this line is C, B space, A line, G space, F line, and E. So this note this far down below treble clef is also E3. So yes, you've got some overlap here. Yes, these both are the same pitch, but be aware, treble clef is a different clef than bass clef, so you really have to be able to figure out what notes are when you're counting all those ledger lines and how those notes can actually be represented in both clefs. And that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe. Bye-bye.